Okay, so I had 3 organs hanging outside of my vagina that were put back into place in November of 2025. In this video, I'm going to share with you my experience with multiple organ prolapse after the birth of my twins, and then I'm going to share with you how I prepped and healed from multiple organ prolapse surgery. Okay, so what I'm going to cover in this video is everything that I was looking for in terms of information when I was prepping for this surgery. How to prepare physically, mentally, how to prep the home, and then I'm going to share with you my timeline for healing so you can know what to potentially expect if you're in a similar situation as myself. Let me take a step back and just give you context. So my name is Robin Pino. I gave birth to boy-girl twins in 2020. I did it vaginally and the OB used forceps. I also got an episiotomy. I had retained placenta. It needed to be manually extracted with a hand. When that was not successful, I also had to have a DNC. So I had a lot of pelvic floor trauma that happened to me, and unfortunately it resulted in a multiple organ prolapse. 2 weeks after the babes were born, we were discharged from the hospital and I went home. And around that time, I felt a golf ball size of skin fall out of my vagina. I thought I was losing my uterus. We immediately went back to the ER and found out that I was experiencing a vaginal wall prolapse. So for the longest time, that's all I thought that I was dealing with. So I went to physiotherapy, I got fitted for a pessary, and I thought I could heal it myself. But unfortunately, the trauma was too much to my pelvic floor. And at the end of the day, none of that was going to actually help fix it, and I was going to need surgery. So in hindsight, I wish I had known that surgery was my only course of action to fix the prolapse and had gotten it done much sooner. So I raised my hand at the beginning of 2024 and said I would like to meet with a urogynecologist and explore my surgical options. Unfortunately, because we live in Canada, there are really long wait times to see specialists, and I had to wait a year to see a specialist. Once I saw the specialist, I was presented with several different options. I was also told at that time that I had a bladder, a uterus, and a rectal prolapse. So those are the 3 organs that were hanging outside of my vagina. And so it was no longer just a vaginal wall prolapse, there were actually organs protruding outside of me. And they were so severe that only surgery could have healed the prolapse. So I needed a cystocele, which is a surgery to repair the bladder prolapse. Let's come back to uterus. I also needed a rectocele, which is what heals the rectal prolapse. So with the uterine prolapse, I was provided with 2 different options. I was told I could have my uterus removed and have a hysterectomy, or I was told I could save my uterus and have a hysteropexy. So the first urogynecologist that I met with actually told me my only option was to have a hysterectomy. So I actually went home and grieved the loss of my uterus, came to terms with the fact that was going to be removed from my body. When I went back to see the more senior urogynecologist, she told me because I was really young, which I said thank you for because I work with a lot of young people, and in my 40s, I'm starting to feel a little old. She told me because I was really young, she wanted to save my uterus, which was really good news because after talking with my naturopath and understanding how much your uterus is an estrogen receptor and that it is possible if it is removed that you could go into menopause much earlier. And I would like to avoid that at all costs. So it was really good news to hear that she was willing to save my uterus. So we ended up doing a cystocele, a hysteropexy. My uterus is now suspended to the sacrospinous ligaments in my body, and then the rectocele. So 3 surgeries in one. So let's talk about how I physically prepared for these 3 surgeries. Okay, so I found out that I was going to be having the surgery about 9 weeks ahead of time. So I was able to properly prepare both physically and mentally. Before the surgery, I was already taking care of myself really well from a physical standpoint. I was working out 4 times a week and doing yoga once a week. So I wanted to make sure that I was going into the surgery as strong as possible. So I maintained that workout schedule. Because this was in November, we were going into winter. So I wanted to make sure that I was getting a lot of walks in. So I started walking for at least 30 minutes a day on my treadmill or outside. Because I was doing physiotherapy before the surgery, I was used to doing a lot of breathing exercises and strengthening of my pelvic floor. So I continued all of that leading up to the surgery. Okay, the other thing that I did was some wand work. So I bought rose quartz wand, and because I had a tight pelvic floor even before I conceived the twins, and I still do have areas in my pelvic floor that are really tight, and because we were going to be suspending my uterus to my sacrospinous ligaments, I wanted to actually work on some of the tight areas of my pelvic floor. So leading up to surgery, I was doing pelvic floor wand work maybe 2 to 3 times a week. And it's simply breathing through it and relaxing. The other thing that I did was see an osteopath 2 times before the surgery just to make sure that my body was well tuned up for the surgery. And then mentally, how did I prepare? I was a little worried because this is a major surgery. I didn't know how I was going to do. And because the last time I was in the hospital was for the birth of the twins, which was quite traumatic. I'll pop up a video here so that you can watch that. I had a lot of fear because I hemorrhaged on the table during the birth of the twins. I was, of course, having fear around hemorrhaging. So I had a lot of conversations with my surgeon as well as the anesthesiologist around how little risk this surgery actually was. So things that I did, and I've shared my morning routine on here if you want to watch those videos, but I continued my morning routine leading up to the surgery. So red light therapy, meditation, reading my Bible, journaling, and also just sitting and visualizing. So that was something that I incorporated into my morning routine, was visualizing waking up from the surgery. Everything had gone well. I wasn't in too much pain. I'm smiling now because that wasn't the case, but everything did go well. So I highly recommend visualizing the success of your surgery. The other thing that I did was journaling how I was feeling. I also did something called scripting, and I actually wrote out as if it had already happened. So I am so thankful and grateful that my surgeon was amazing and everything went well. I woke up, laughing from my surgery. And so I wrote down a lot of this visualization technique in terms of how I wanted the surgery to go. And then self-care was really important during this time, making sure that I was getting regular Epsom salt baths and time in my infrared sauna before we went into surgery. I was going to not be able to have a bath for at least 8 weeks after surgery, so having those Epsom salt baths leading up to was really important for me. Okay, and then we needed to prep the house. So there was different things. Our bed in our primary bedroom was actually on the floor, and I was a little worried about having to get in and out of bed and using my abdominal muscles, which were going to be injured by the laparoscopic incisions to fix my uterus. We had a bed frame that we just hadn't set up, so we set that up. Well, my husband set that up so that I could easily get in and out of bed. The other thing that I wanted to do was find a bunch of books to read so that I wasn't just bed rotting, watching TV, reality TV, you name it, while I was recovering. I actually got into the ACOTAR series, which I am now obsessed with. And so my husband got me the first 2 books while I was recovering. I got the 3rd to 5th books for Christmas. So I was still healing over the Christmas holidays. So I just devoured those books all within a period of 2 months. Some of the things that I bought before the surgery, and we actually ended up buying after. So I bought a Perry bottle because someone recommended that it's really great for being able to clean yourself. And then we actually ended up having to buy a sitz bath because I was in so much pain. My tailbone was in so much pain because of where my uterus was sutured to. So my uterus was suspended and sutured to my sacrospinous ligament, which is near your sacrum, which is near your tailbone. And so that pain was excruciating for at least 3 months. And for at least 8 weeks, it was really hard for me to go to the bathroom. It was really hard to go number 2. The pain was just excruciating. So a sitz bath helped me clean myself and relax before having to use the washroom. I also made myself a bunch of padsicles. So I made a few before surgery. I actually made another bunch after when I started running out because they were so healing to have like cold down there. So the sutures are internal, but down there is just painful. So I made padsicles with aloe vera juice, a little bit of witch hazel, and some doTERRA essential oils. I used frankincense, lavender, and helichrysum. You do bleed quite a lot internally, and so those are really helpful. I brought the stretchy underwear home from the hospital and would put the padsicles in those, and I lived in those for at least 8 weeks. The other thing that I wanted to do, and I didn't do a bunch of it because my husband was really helpful, but I wanted to do a bunch of meal prep. So I did prep bone broth so I could sip on that. I wanted to make a few soups and stews because this was in November. We were going into the winter season. So I wanted to have a few of those prepared that my husband could easily heat up for me. The other thing that I had on hand, which was really important, was tart cherry juice for anti-inflammatory properties. And then you need fiber because pooping is excruciating. So you need to make it as loose as possible. So I ate a ton of apples and a ton of prunes during this time. All right, let's talk about the pre-op period. So before your surgery, you will meet with an on-call nurse, either in person. Mine was actually over the phone. And we talked about all the supplements that I'm taking and which ones I needed to stop for at least a week ahead of time. So I need to stop collagen, fish oil, anything that's anti-inflammatory, curcumin, turmeric, anything like that. I also was taking LDN for my multiple sclerosis, which is low-dose naltrexone, because that could have an effect on the painkillers post-surgery. I also had to stop that. So that was about a week week before the surgery. Going into the surgery, I was told that I needed to drink 3 sugary drinks the night before because I'm quite health conscious. I didn't want to touch pop, and so I opted for apple juice. So I drank 3 cups of apple juice from the kids' juice boxes the night before, and then 1 cup that morning. I needed to stop consuming food by midnight the night before, and then in terms of like water, I needed to stop at least 1.5 hours before heading to the hospital. So this part was fascinating. So you need to show up at the hospital with no lotion, no nail polish, no makeup, no jewelry, no contacts. So I came with my glasses, a case for them, and just a bag for my clothes. So I was told that the surgery was going to take about 3 hours, which sounds quite long, but it is 3 surgeries in one, and that it was going to take me about an hour and a half to come out of anesthesia. And then someone needs to pick you up from the hospital. So I was supposed to be in just for the day. I ended up having to stay overnight because my pain was quite high, and then you're not allowed to drive for 24 hours after. I feel like it was much longer that I couldn't drive because I was in so much pain for quite a while. So do plan for someone taking care of you for quite a bit. And who doesn't love being a passenger princess? If you are dealing with multiple organ prolapse or even just one prolapse, know that it can get better. Mine was quite severe because of the twin vaginal birth, but most people don't have such a severe prolapse, and they are able to heal it with things like pelvic floor physiotherapy. If surgery is an option for you and you're curious about what it takes to heal, then this is the reason why I made this video. Would you mind liking and subscribing so that I know that this is the type of content that you might want to see on this channel? I make lots of videos about twin mom life, living well with MS, productivity, organization, and healthy habits. And I'd love to have you be a part of this world. Okay, so let's go into what happened day of surgery and the healing timeline. So I showed up at the hospital and I checked into the day surgery unit. So I got all prepped. I was wheeled towards the OR and I actually talked to the anesthesiologist in the hallway outside the OR. I was then told at that time that they had actually flown in a second surgeon. So there was 2 surgeons operating on me. We talked about my history with anesthesia, and we talked about living with MS and how I was probably going to have a relapse after the surgery, just because of the amount of stress on my body, which I was well aware of. Okay, so you come out of the surgery and you're in recovery, and then they wheel you into the day surgery kind of unit where you're supposed to recover. I was in so much pain that I wasn't able to actually void my bladder. So they put a catheter in for the surgery, and then they are supposed to take it out and you're supposed to void your bladder. But I was so tense, I was in so much pain that like everything was squeezing and I couldn't relax enough to void my bladder. So in the catheter went again, and I had to stay overnight. I then tried again in the morning. I still couldn't void, so they put the catheter in again and said that they were going to send me home with it. I was really angry about that. I wasn't aware that that was kind of the norm, that many people go home with a catheter. So that's one thing I would say, like, be aware that like you don't necessarily need to void. If you are in so much pain and you can't relax, go home with the catheter, allow your body to heal before they remove it. So I went back in 3 days later. Again, I tried to void, couldn't void. So it was left in for at least, I think it was a week and a half that I had the catheter in, and I called her Kathy the catheter. Once I had an appointment to go in and take it out, they took it out, they fill your bladder with, I believe it's saline, and you sit on this special toilet. They void, they measure how much you were able to void, and then if you pass with flying colors, they'll ultrasound your belly to see how much remains in your bladder. They couldn't actually find my bladder, which meant I had emptied fully. So I passed with flying colors finally when I was able to take it out. So a really important thing is to get up and move around. Even though you're going to be in excruciating amounts of pain, you do need to get up every so often to empty the catheter bag. And so that's an excuse to get moving. And the reason why is to avoid getting blood clots. So something that I did really early on, I think I did it for about 4 weeks religiously, was I wheeled my red light therapy over to the bed. I lay spread eagle with the red light on my vagina for healing. Okay, and then at the 7-week mark post-surgery, I had an appointment with my surgeon to see how I was healing. I still had a few sutures that hadn't dissolved yet. I was told that they would dissolve on their own. I was cleared to have a bath, so I immediately went home to have a bath. I was cleared to start sexy time with my husband, which we started very slow, but it went okay. I was cleared to have a clitoral orgasm, which I asked them at the hospital before the surgery. I said, how long do I have to wait before I have a clitoral orgasm? And they're like, sorry, what? I was like, my toys are asking, like, how long do we have have to wait before we can play again. And they said, you know, we should probably wait till the 7-week mark because when you orgasm, your uterus contracts, and I didn't want the pain potentially of like what that might feel like with the sutures on my sacrospinous. So same thing. So I couldn't have a bath, couldn't have a sauna until the 7-week mark. It's showers for you until then. I treated this time as if I had just had a baby. So I did 0 to 6 week postpartum exercises, which really helped with rebuilding my core strength and strengthening my pelvic floor. Okay, so let's talk pooping, because this was probably the one thing that I was not prepared for and was probably the worst part. Because of where the sutures are inside the vaginal wall and where the uterus is suspended to your sacrospinous ligament, there's two options. You can have your uterus suspended to your uterine ligaments, but mine were so shot that they needed to do the sacrospinous, which is close to where poop comes out. And because of that, it was absolutely excruciating. And so take stool softeners. I was trying to get by with just like magnesium calm or natural calm, which is a more natural option. But we also did the Clear Lax or Restore Lax, which is the prescription version of a laxative. And it is highly recommended because you do not want solid poops early on because it would be so painful. I had to moan as if I was giving birth every time I pooped just to get through it. It was that excruciating. Yeah, so the things that I wish I had known ahead of time was about potentially having to go home with a catheter, the amount of pain I was going to be in my tailbone. That lasted for about 3 months. The pain is completely gone now, but I was worried that it was never going to go away. Pooping is going to be excruciating. Take your stool softener and then buy the peri bottle and a sitz bath. Make yourself as comfortable as possible after the surgery. Okay, so returning to workouts and activity again. So I waited at least 3 months before I started workouts. Really, it was because I was in so much pain. So I was on quite a lot of bed rest. I started walking a little bit more, standing a little bit longer, but my body and my lower back really struggled with anything weight bearing for too long. So around the 3-month mark, I started really small workouts. So my personal trainer and I talked about how we wanted to proceed. And I was doing, less than 10 pounds. And then we would proceed then 10 to 15 pounds. Around the 5-month mark is when I really started increasing the weights. And I'm at the 6-month mark now. And I am back to lifting, my 1 rep max or even starting to push it further. So it took me at least 6 months to get back into really hard, I wouldn't say hard workouts, but ones that are more challenging now. I've actually had my 6-month follow-up appointment with my surgeon, and unfortunately there is a little bit of a bladder prolapse showing again, and I don't know if it's just because I'm going to be prone to them throughout the rest of my life or because I'm doing these workouts, but regardless, the workouts and actually getting back into running is very important for me from a quality of life standpoint, so I'm okay with potentially prolapsing again. So there's a couple things that I'm looking at. It was recommended that I might want to try vaginal estrogen to just plump up the tissue to actually support my pelvic floor. The other thing is potentially wearing a pessary, making sure the one that I was fitted with before might not be the right one for me now. So going to see my physiotherapist and seeing if I should be using a pessary for, let's say, walking or running or workouts. And the other thing that I'm researching is using a B-Pulse chair, which a lot of pelvic floor physiotherapists might have access to at their clinic. Okay, this was a really long video, so I hope I have answered any potential questions that you had about multiple organ prolapse surgery and what it took to prepare and heal from it. If you have any questions, please pop them below. I would love to be able to answer them. Thanks for being here. Now go and live well, and I'll see you in the next video.